This is a solution-oriented documentary. While it may seem at the start that this is yet another movie that highlights the ills of the world and serves little purpose but to arouse you emotionally, this is not one of those films. We know a secret. But guess what? You know it too. You just don't remember. We would like to help you remember. Peace. The greatest lie perpetrated by mankind is that the more technologically advanced a people are, the greater the civilization. True civilization is not measured by how many pyramids, temples, skyscrapers, satellites, computers, or automobiles you can build. True civilization is not denoted by how large an empire was or how many peoples they conquered and subjugated. True civilization is measured by how in harmony you are with the nature and the cosmos. Mankind is at constant war with nature and itself. Human beings live in peace with nature and each other. Artificial technology and perpetual states of war are, in fact, the antithesis of high civilization. Peace and harmony are the pinnacles of civilization and of existence itself. The human being, in its natural state, is a highly superior advanced technology. In our natural state, we didn't need terabytes of hard drive to store data. We had such great memories, we could even remember the day in which we were born. In the book Nisa, The Life and Words of a Kung Woman, a woman recounts the day of her birth and said that it was common for those of her family and her neighboring peoples to do so. In our natural state, we didn't need cell phones or email to communicate with one another over long distances. We had our third sight and psychic senses heightened to such a degree where we could think of the person we wanted to communicate with and did so. In our natural state, we didn't have the urge to make bombs, guns, or other weapons to destroy each other when we had serious disagreements or differences. Sports games were played between nations in order to settle these differences. Many Native American nations played the game of lacrosse and called it the little brother of war. So it is understandable why in this modern age, folks gravitate towards professional sports and get so emotionally invested. Only they usually have no idea why they do, and therefore all that energy is spent upon frivolous pursuits. In our natural state, we had no desire to explore outer space and the universe by building rocket ships. We knew what the universe was like because we were galactic travelers and had the knowledge that we are extraterrestrial beings. Kemetic philosophy teaches how we came from the Sirius and Orion star systems, and it would be to there that we would return once we tired of our human time here on Mother Earth. In our natural state, We didn't need to experiment in laboratories to quote-unquote discover answers that we had about nature and the state of being. In Dogon mythology, they show knowledge of genetics, astronomy, mathematics, physiology, and the beginnings of the conscious universe. In our natural state, we had the foresight to use our advanced mathematical knowledge to actually predict the future. The Kemetic and Ifa divination systems, for example, are what modern-day computer programming is actually derivative of. And its goals are also to predict all possible outcomes.
Lord.
So, Charles, let's talk about mathematics. Let's first start with some of the most stunning evidence for, 40,000-year-old mathematics in its beginnings in the Ashango bone, that artifact that even Alexander Marshak talked about.
You mentioned the Ashango bone before. The Ashango bone, very simply, is just that, a single bone carved on two sides with a series of markings on each edge of both sides, found by a Belgian archaeologist back in the late 50s. At first, he thought that the Shango bone was a mere 8,500 years old, but he recognized the markings were a number system. They were grouped in such a way that they were clearly a number system, and they were a number system, according to him, that revealed a knowledge of prime numbers. He thinks multiplication by duplication, and even show evidence of a decimal system. Well, Brooks and Yellen, as I say, redated that site about 10 years ago, maybe even 12 years ago, and found that site isn't 8,500 years old as we thought, but was 25,000 years old. Now we're back into the Upper Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, and here we have evidence of what I call proto-mathematics in Central Africa, going back 25,000 years ago, and other artifacts from around the same region are older yet, although nothing as striking as the Ashango bone has shown itself. Now, the reason why this is also interesting is because if you fast forward about, 20,000 years to the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt, about 3,800 years ago to 4,000 years ago, you come across there has survived from that time a document known as the Rind mathematical papyrus. And some of the mathematical information that is carved very sort of simply and concisely on the Shango bone sort of reappears in the Rind mathematical papyrus, including the multiplication by doubling, for example, the decimal system. So that it's worth speculating, is there a connection, a 20,000-year connection that links the cultures and the, shall we say, proto-science of East Central Africa of 25,000 years ago to the ancient Egyptian civilization, which of course had taken mathematics to a much higher level, as shown in the Rind mathematical papyrus and other fragments of mathematical documents that have come down to us, including algebra, trigonometry, geometry, just for starters.
Could you explain this African I Ching that you talk about? I know that I call it the I Ching because you have this wonderful Chinese divination system that we know of as the I Ching, where you throw a coin or some yarrow sticks and you get a binary yes, no, broken line, solid line. You write it down, you throw again, you have 6 throws and you end up with a hexagram, hex 6 lines, and you get these variations on a theme, and each theme has its own kind of gestalt or symbology to it, and then you can get a reading on your question. Jung says synchronicity would explain the connection there between throwing a stone and contemplating your own dilemma there and getting a reading on it. I was just so delighted to find that in Africa you have this similar to an I Ching system that seems equally sophisticated, even more so, even more possibilities. Could you explain that one, please, Charles?
Yes. Among West African peoples, there's a system called Fa or Ifa or Ufa or Afa. Same system, different names in different countries. And what happens is there are 16 palm nuts that are grasped in the right hand, and then they leave only 1 or 2 nuts in the left. If 2 nuts remain, a single mark is made on the divining tray. If 1 nut remains, a double mark is made. Repeating this procedure 4 times will give 1 of 16 basic figures. Repeating it 8 times gives a pair of basic figures, 1 of 256 derivative figures diagrams. When that is done, and they have created a complete picture of these diagrams, it's really a prescription of fate. It tells you everything you need to know about the patient, the client who is consulting you. It is the divination system. It tells them about their current status in life, what has happened, what's going to happen, and what they need to do in order to take care of the particular issues that are facing them. It is very similar to the Chinese I Ching divination system, which is built upon a system of trigrams and hexagrams, because there are basically 64 of these trigrams, and the 64 is the same is part of the same to the end system that you heard me talk about. This 64 being, I think, is to the 6th power.
So the African system just kept doubling a few more times to get 256 different possibilities.
Right. So there's a doubling procedure that occurs also in the I Ching that also partakes of the to the end system, and it is also a divination system. Now, there are for each in the African system, for each figure, for each diagram, there is a saying that goes with it. There are like 2,000 of these sayings, so that a adept or an expert has to know at least 1,000 of them. And these sayings cover almost every aspect of an individual and community life.
So it's like wisdom literature. Could you tell us, you were telling us a bit more about this divination system and its relationship to the I Ching?
Yeah, and let me say this.
And wisdom literature.
The other thing I wanted to say is that if you look at what you have called this binary system, and that is what it is, I call it the to the end system, which you find in the multiplication by doubling mathematics of ancient Egypt. You find in the Ifa system of the Yoruba. You find even in the I Ching. It is also the fundamental basis of computer language.
It is.
Computer language is basically a binary system, and it uses the property of the 2 to the n series, what I call the 2 to the n series. And the other important thing about the 2 to the n series, it is the only series, the only series aside from just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, it's the only series that can generate all integers, all possible integers. So it seems like it's real simple, the doubling, but and yet at the same time,
the singularity that created the universe. Concerning the sacrifice Nomo's relationship to Po, the Dogon say, by its spinning, the unwound Po had poured everything it contained into Nomo's great ark. This ark was made from the rest of the sacrificed victim's placenta. But this ark, so the victim is also female. But this ark, according to the Dogon, symbolizes the entire world in time and space, and eventually, to fill his creation, Amma causes the ark to descend, moving back and forth like a pendulum. While the ark was swinging to and fro, the fact that it was suspended from a chain made it pivot on its axis back and forth. In this way, the line of descent made a double helix, reproducing the very movement of life, of the whirlwind that quickened the seed.
The whirlwind that quickened the seed.
In this way, the line of its descent, we're talking about the ark, made a double helix, reproducing the very movement of life, of the whirlwind that quickened the seed. They are talking about the DNA.
Right.
This movement was maintained by the breath of the ancestors as it passed through the nozzle. The nozzle is shaped just like this whirling respiration called the spinning wind, which gave force to the helix of descent. And so here they connect a Piscean Dogon avatar who is sacrificed in order to counteract disorder in the universe to a ark, which is the world itself, descends in a rotating motion that creates a double healing, the very movement of life.
It's a whole new take on Christian mythology.
And it comes right into what we think of as what? Genetics, physiology, embryology. You see, this is what I'd like to get across to your listeners. we're having to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It was smashed. It was smashed in the name of intellect. It was smashed in the name of reason. It was smashed in the name of science. It was not smashed in the name of scientific doubt. Science comes from a word meaning, comes from a Latin word scientia, which means just knowledge. That's all it's ever supposed to be, knowledge. Not just a certain type of knowledge acquired in a certain limited way, a knowledge without illumination. If you look at the Dogon ancient Egypt, everything connects. Religion, the ages, physiology, genetics, healing, health, history, mathematics, astronomy. It's all part of a piece. It's all part of a whole cloth. And the Dogon are one of the few African systems that reveal this in an intelligible, cogent way. Now listen to this. This is the Dogon conception of the universe. The Dogon conception of the universe is based on a principle of vibrations of matter and a general movement of the universe as a whole. The original germ of life is symbolized by the smallest cultivated seed, which they call the Po. This seed is quickened by an internal vibration, bursts the enveloping sheath, and emerges to reach the utmost confines of the universe. This is the Big Bang.
Yes.
Can I say one more thing? It might take. Can I say one more thing, or do you have to?
No. Say one more thing.
Yeah, I got something. Yeah. Now, this business of vibrations is very, very interesting because it's at the heart of number and what number does.
The sad reality of today's age is that most live in fear. They live in fear that in 2012 an apocalypse, cataclysm, disaster, or world war will be approaching rapidly and will either destroy humanity as we know it or force us to alter the way that we live drastically. People are building underground bunkers, stockpiling food, water, and weapons, preparing for zombie infestations, praying for a Messiah to rescue us, or waiting on spaceships to descend from the heavens. Why are you doing this? Why are you waiting? Why are you sitting around aimlessly, hoping and praying that the so-called powers that be don't destroy the world in your lifetime, living willfully under the illusions and programming conceptions that were designed for us? Instead of waiting, you can take charge of your future now. The future is now. No more wars. No more senseless violence, no more poverty, no more malnutrition or hunger. There are no victims in history. Let's be clear on that. Yes, on a mundane emotional level, we should feel compassion and empathy for the suffering and abuse that our ancestors and all of the oppressed peoples of the world have endured. But on an enlightened level of seership, we should acknowledge our power and realize that this world is as we have made it. Though it may be a holographical, illusionary matrix that we perceive and feel that we were tricked into maneuvering within, we created it and have become complicit and continue to fool ourselves.
It's Einstein's long-held tenet that no communication can travel faster than the speed of light. Okay, we're going to skip all that other stuff. Now, okay, David Bohm came along from the University of London and said that he believed that aspect's findings imply that objective reality does not exist, that despite its apparent solidity, the universe is at heart a phantom, a gigantic and splendidly detailed hologram. Okay, real quickly, I'm throwing that in because I want you to understand this concept that they talked about with the particles, where no matter how far they were apart, they were basically still one particle. That would be you. That's what I'm saying to you. That would be you. It is the illusion of all of this separateness and madness going on, but it would be you. And with that said, that is why you know everything, but you will only engage in the memory of certain things according to where we are on our journey. We cannot remember it all because the game, there'd be no reason to experience the game. So we're only going to access memory according to how we as the individual are evolving. You do not have to wait for an entire group to evolve yourself. If we had more time, we could talk about that, how you as an individual are really determining what's out there. So you as an individual you need to work on you. Just work on where you are. When you do, you're going to shift everything else around you, and it won't seem like it does right now. You shift everything around you. And I'm not talking just fantasy stuff. I'm talking the real, it's really true. It really, really happens that way. It's all, again, it's all science. It's all science.
You know, my computer seems like such a smooth, clean machine. What's inside it?
Lead, cadmium, mercury, chromium, polyvinyl chlorides. All of these materials have known toxicological effects that range from brain damage to kidney disease to mutations, cancers. The problem with e-waste is that it is the fastest growing component of the municipal waste stream worldwide.
What do you mean fastest growing?
Well, we throw out about 130,000 computers every day in the United States.
130,000 every day?
Correct.
In the United States alone?
Correct. And we throw out over 100 million cell phones every year.
When you did the laboratory analysis of the samples that you took from Guayu, were you surprised at the levels that you found?
Yes, we were surprised because they are extremely high, and even higher than the other areas where open burning takes place. So especially, I was very surprised at the lead levels.
What did you find in the lead levels in the dust samples?
We used a control site, which is about 6 kilometers away from Guayu, and we found levels which were about 330 times higher. I mean, in lead.
6 kilometers away. And Guayu was 300 and...
It's 330 times.
330
yeah, over
times
300
higher.
times higher.
I mean, remember, as a species, Homo sapiens are poor. Half the world lives on less than $2 a day. 2 billion people live on less than $1 a day. We're sending electronic wastes that are very toxic, that require extraordinary skills to disassemble in the most precise combustion conditions and technological conditions to people who are making virtually nothing without any safety equipment, without the proper equipment, without regulatory oversights, and we are exposing them to poisons. We are poisoning these people. We are poisoning these children. We are poisoning their water supplies. We are poisoning their soil.
At a scrapyard in the Ghanaian capital Accra, workers burn electronic cables to extract precious metals. Electronic products with a large quantity of copper are highly sought after by scrap dealers.
Yeah, if we get a chance, someone dispose computer items, we do buy so that we scrap it as aluminium copper. We burn it to take the copper inside. When we burn, the smoke is proving that disease, so we doesn't like it so. So we need the smoke should come down so that when we burn it, we won't face any difficulty from the smoke for sick.
Workers, both adults and children, sift through the ashes for scraps of metal. When it rains, ashes flush into nearby ponds and rivers where animals graze. Across the scrapyard, hundreds of workers take apart electronic products. Only the parts containing copper, such as electric cables, as well as metal and plastic casings are kept for recycling. The rest are dumped or burnt, as there are hardly any e-waste recycling facilities in the country to process them.
Goddamn hacker, that second time tonight that asshole's cut in.
The movement was begun 8 months ago by a small group of scientists who discovered, quite by accident, these signals being sent through.
It's giving me a headache. Yeah, tell me about it. Must took the hackers months to figure out how to do this.
The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. They have created a repressive society, and we are their unwitting accomplices. Their intention to rule rests with the annihilation of consciousness. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. Please understand, they are safe as long as they are not discovered. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated. Deploying the water.
author of Vitamins and Minerals from A to Z, Dr. Jewel Pookrum, and she brings a sense of vitality and boundless energy to her work, and you can tell just by the little bit of conversation. Now, we're talking about melanin, and I just want to make a connection, if you can, doctor, between melanin and the pineal gland. If melanin is the depths of the universe personified in black people, what is the relationship between that universe and the pineal gland?
Well, the pineal gland is really like the core regulator of how much of this biological light you are able to resonate with at any particular time. And it actually is on a cyclic interchange. So we know, for example, that in our solar system there appears to be daytime and nighttime.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we know that there are certain things that happen in daytime versus at nighttime because the frequency of light changes. The temperature also changes. And so with the pineal gland being a regulator of the modulation of the activity of melanin, this is what it does. It's a modulator, and it's a regulator for the activity of melanin. So it's very interesting that the pineal gland does two things, primarily as far as its chemical activity. In the daytime, it creates something known as serotonin. At nighttime, it creates a chemical known as melatonin. The serotonin is needed to allow the cells to begin to become very active in discharging waste and absorbing nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
At nighttime, the melatonin comes out in darkness. The brain has to be sealed off from light, so the eyes have to be closed, where melanin-stimulating hormone then stimulates the process of melatonin. From the pineal gland, the melatonin is then released into the bloodstream to cause the cells to now begin to use the nutrients that is absorbed during the day and to rebuild the cell. So literally, you're supposed to die in the daytime and be regenerated at night.
We will take a different twist. I've lectured here before, but tonight we will talk in particular about dreams and the African connection as how it relates to the pineal. Now, many of you are well aware that since August of this year, there has been an explosion in the subject on melatonin, M-A-L-A-T-O-N-I-N, the hormone released by the pineal gland during the hours of darkness. It is sold widespread in health food stores in 2 and 3 milligram sizes. They can't keep enough on the shelf. It's been published and talked about on the front cover of Newsweek. They've even had shows on ABC, Nightline, and others, 2020, about melatonin. There have been articles written in the LA Times editorial section. So it's a hot subject, but why now? Why now? The pineal gland, melatonin, is not, it is said, it is something that is relatively not known about. There have been 3 books that have been talked about widely, one of them written by a person named Russell Ritter, who is the editor of the journal called Pineal Research. However, if you go to UCLA tonight or tomorrow, you can't even check out the journal of Pineal Research. They will tell you that they stopped carrying it in 1991. How can that be? I was there last year in September of 1994, and I pulled it right off the current periodical shelf up to the year 1994. It meant it's time to suppress, to hide that information. We studied about the pineal gland at Martha King Hospital way back in 1976. I had the pleasure of writing a paper called the Pineal Gland Review in 1973. In 1976, we were working on pineal calcification at the Fanon Center. So this notion that there's not much known about the pineal is just another example of what? White supremacy propaganda. But it fits a much larger mission. The mission is disinformation, to make people afraid to use their own minds. Afraid to use their own minds. If you talk about dreams, you have an experience I had on front page the other morning. Brother said the brother got kind of hot. He's a good brother. I don't want to be harsh with the brother. He's a good brother. I'm going to meet up soon. And the brother said, oh, you bringing up white authors. As if Rudolf Steiner, Church of Light, the Kabbalah, and others were the first one to talk about dreams and spirituality. If you talk about spirituality, you may say, oh, you're talking about doing negative works, possessing somebody's mind. But clearly forgetting that the first revolution that took place in the Americas was in Palmyra, in Brazil, and they practiced active African spirituality and religion, and they held a free nation state for 100 years and fought off all comers. And the second one took place in Haiti, and it was a revolution to this day that they're definitely afraid of because it involved African spirituality, which was misnamed voodoo, and put a negative label on it, having you afraid of your own spirituality, your own psychic powers, painting it as if you talk these dreams, the devil is going to get you. You end up being a sex maniac. You're going to be a walking zombie who's doing negative things. They paint only the worst images because that's what they do with it. That's what they do. So as we approach this question of dreams and the African, I will have a slideshow. It's very extensive. I'm going to give you the lecture first for about a half hour, and then go on to slides and lectures. I give you the slideshow. And we have about 60 slides to cover because I want to clearly to show to you that this notion of the African approach to dreams is the foundation of all mental science. Foundation. But notice, let's go to the Kemetic name for dreams. You know what it means? To see. So dreams, from a Kemetic perspective, the Medunetra name means to see or to visualize. And so when we go to sleep at night, or even during the daytime, when we have visions during the day, we are simply using our great minds. But the model of the mind that is presented by Europeans is a false, corrupt model. It's incomplete. They paint a model that your mind is only that which you've experienced in your own personal lifetime, as if you have no part of your mind can look into the future. No part of your mind can look into your parents' bloodline. As if if you get into those realms, that's called pseudoscience, false science, witchcraft, voodoo, called something negative, the dark sciences. When you get into it from an African perspective, and you get into it real deep, you readily see that the African perspective fully embraced a spirituality that did not know no boundaries of time and space. So what is commonly being presented by the Rosicrucians, Church of Light, is really ancient African science, cut down, watered down, adapted to their perspective, and they hide the African origins. Have you ever heard of a person named Pascal Beverly Randolph? P.B. Randolph? Just take this name just for a little sideline. Some of you probably have. And if I give you a name, I want to give you a reference. Pascal Beverly Randolph, he has a recent book that was republished called Sexual Magic. Don't get thrown off by the title, please. You can find other books of mine through health research. Pascal Beverly Randolph was born in the 1820s. He was born of a Madagascan, meaning black woman who was born off the west coast of Tanzania, mother who was a seer, S-E-E-R. What does that mean? She could see and do works in the invisible realm. So, you know, Dr. King, what does it have to do with African history? You see, I'm saying the African history that we're trying to expose now is embracing a deepness of spirituality and learning how to use these powers for African liberation. The same way that it was done in Haiti, the same way that it was done in Palmyra, in Brazil. It's fundamental. Anyway, Pascal Beverly Randolph, then his father was a white boy who had probably used his mother in some negative fashion. Nonetheless, the father disowned him, and Pascal Beverly Randolph as a child then left and joined and became a merchant seaman or a sailor. In all likelihood, he sailed in black ships owned by black men, one of them being Paul Cuffrey of the New England area. Paul Cuffrey is a man who bought his own freedom and had 3 ships who ran from the eastern seaboard down to Europe, down to the Middle East, down to ports in Africa. This was all taking place in the early 1800s when slavery is going full steam. Pascal Beverly Randolph then, by his own introductions, is exposed to so-called secret teachings and becomes an initiate and founds, guess what? The Rosicrucians in the United States. A black man named Pascal Beverly Randolph founded that. He also founded, guess what else? The Prince Hall Masons in the United States. And he also worked with, guess what else? He was a friend of Abraham Lincoln. He worked with the Freedmen's Bureau in Louisiana. But guess what happened to him? He was ostracized, and eventually he was killed. They said he committed suicide. Me and brother got deep with it in a very, very major way. And from his works, another person by the name of Clymer copied his works, and those works were also transported back to Europe and became the foundation for some of the works of Rudolf Steiner. So just wanted to share those with you. But go ahead, in terms of this African connection, and the way that I've been exposed to it, is that when you study the pineal gland, and when you hear about melatonin, you won't hear any of this that we're talking about now. They had to talk about melatonin these days for one very good reason. Because you had begun to read about it and talk about it and ask questions and to do things in your own operations. I began to get phone calls from brothers in Trinidad, sisters in Jamaica. I began to hear people were listening to these audio tapes in Ethiopia and in Ghana and in Zaire. My brother, my own blood brother, who had traveled frequently to Africa, so he was walking to an airport one day in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. The sister walked up to him and says, "Is your brother Richard King? Your voice sounds just like him. I got my tape right next to me." So I'm saying the word has been spread, not my word, because many have gone before me talking about the pineal gland. But melatonin, it came up that through our work we came to see that black people have different levels of melatonin in their bodies. Black people have much more active pineal glands than white folks. I repeat that. Black folks have much more active pineal glands than most white folks. Not all, but I'm saying in a general kind of sense. That the pineal hormone that was being produced by black folks was about 2 times the amount of pineal hormone that was being produced by white folks. Now do you understand why they must take those pills? Now do you understand why they must take those pills? And guess what else? Not only is it a question of the melatonin pill, it was also a question, here's the big fundamental question, of what's happening in the ozone layer. In these next 5 years, most of America, most of South America, Central Europe and Asia, and Africa in particular, will be exposed to almost lethal doses of ultraviolet light, B and even C. And what does that mean for people who have blonde skin or reds? It means either your skin must become darker or your incidence of skin cancer will become so great that you will not reach late adulthood. You will not reach late adulthood. In the next 5 years, Dr. King, where do I find that reference? You find that reference in the Tuesday issue of the LA Times and in the issue of the journal called Nature, published in England. So that's where you go back to the Tuesday issue of the LA Times, and you'll find it in I think, in the first few sections. In the next 5, that means between 1995 and the year what? 2000. In the year 2000. And what does melatonin do? They will not tell you in these little health journals that melatonin turns on pigment cells, skin production. They don't tell you that. Now, some people say that melatonin will lead to less actual sexual function. Is that true of all people? No, that's part of our concern. As a people, we have to turn our socialization skills. No, by no means. It has a different kind of function for people of different kinds of pigmentation, and a very opposite kind of function for another kind of pigmentation kind of scheme. But nonetheless, melatonin, a hormone released by the pineal gland during nighttime, it was said to have been discovered for the first time in 1956 by Axelrod and Workman. How could that be? Is when you can go right now to the museum in Cairo and look at King Tut's tomb, the second shrine, the right panel, and see a scene that shows the sun putting rays of light into the forehead where the pineal was located. And there's only one thing in that anatomical location that responds to sunlight and moonlight, and that's the pineal. So that was 1550 BC. So how could it be that 3,300 years before white folks rediscovered the pineal gland, Africans knew about it in detail? But guess what? That was nothing new. That was old. It was known because even going further back, the so-called pyramid texts, and I'll read to you a few of them in just a minute. In the pyramid text, written again way back at in the so-called Old Kingdom times, they talk about this thing. They didn't call it the pineal gland. It was called the Eye of Horus. The Eye of Horus. Let me read to you what it says in a few places, and we'll begin the slideshow in just a few minutes. I have 2 books that will be available at the front and also back at the desk. The African Origin of Biological Psychiatry and Melanin, the Key to Freedom. I'm going to quote throughout this lecture from both. But here it reads, this is reading from the pyramid text. Now they even knew about what happened when your inner eye wasn't working correctly. They said that if you had a defective eye, and if you looked at blackness with a defective eye, guess what happened? You saw the opposites of what really was there. That if your eye was injured, your inner eye was injured, you could look at black and you would think you were looking at white. So in other words, it causes a reversal of the images. So I'm reading to you from paragraph 157 from the coffin text. And you can buy the coffin, they're available in paperback. He said, and Ray said to Horus, let me see your eye, since this happened to it. Now again, this is sun god Ra, this is a mythological statement, saying that light is speaking to his son after his son has had his eye damaged. And there are at least 2 levels of discourse here. One level is that Horus was battling Seth. Who is Seth? At one time in history, Seth was a positive southern god tied to the moon. We won't be able to go into all that kind of dialogue just now. Later on, Seth became known as the people with sunburned skin, the red of skin, and it became synonymous with Europeans who were crossing over the deserts trying to re-enter home.